Kate Falcha. It's time for our Saturday book, and I have a doozy this week. And you have my friends Denise and Deborah from the Cosmic Fold. It's a YouTube channel. We meet Wednesday evenings. I always post a reminder in my community notes. We hit on all kinds of interesting and unusual, esoteric, and otherwise paranormal, whatever topics. And they asked me to read this book, and we're going to record a discussion with the three of us. But when I started to read it, I got about 2 pages in and I thought, wait a minute, this book is so interesting. I'm doing it for a Saturday. So this is our Saturday book. Final Events by Nick Redfern. You may recognize Nick Redfern's name. Check out the cover of this book. It says everything you need to know. Okay. So let me talk just a little bit about the author. He works full-time, and he's been out there in the UFO-ish world for a very long time. He works as an author, lecturer, and journalist. He writes for UFO Magazine, Fate, 14 Times, and Paranormal Magazine. He wrote books, There's Something in the Woods, On the Trail of the Saucer Spies, and Science Fiction Secrets. He's been on numerous TV shows, and you might recognize him from all the TV shows he's been on. BBC, History Channel, National Geographic, Sci-Fi Channel. He lives in Texas, and this is a picture. You might recognize him. This is a really interesting book. It's dense with references to organizations within the military and people's names who have a lot of military rank involved in their title and their names. I will try to keep it as clear as I can. The core seed, the germ, as it were, of this book is really intriguing. And I would urge you to remember when we did Lou Elizondo's book, I can't remember the name, a few months ago, there was mention made of what I believe to be the group that's featured in this book. You'll very quickly see what I mean. So let's just get started and the story unfolds. Now, as I said, when I first started to read it, I wasn't taking notes to do a synopsis or a summary. I was just jotting things down to trigger my memory for my conversation with Denise and Deborah. So my first little bit here is maybe a bit sparse, but it's okay because he elaborates as we move along. So this premise of this book is that when people refer to seeing UFOs, talking to ETs, any kind of situation like that, it's not from another planet. It's not extraterrestrials outside Earth in a physical sense. These are entities. Now, this is what the book is debating. So I'm not asserting this is true or not true. This is the situation, the debate that exists within certain circles, and we'll talk about it. But there's this debate that it's not ETs from another planet. It's beings under complete control of malign entities without emotion. Beings that hate humans, who harvest souls, who have steered people away from religion to embrace Satan disguised as an ET. And the question is, amongst these people studying this, who entertain this theory in the military, most of them, some in like aerospace technology, aerospace contractors, military some in politics, some researchers. It's a group. But if you remember when we read Lou Elizondo's book, he talked about a subset of military personnel who were aware of human ET interaction, but they believed that it was demonic. I think this may be who we're speaking about right now. Anyway, they debate, should the general public be told? Now, there is a group within the group called the Collins Elite, and we'll get more detail on them in a minute. And they say, yes, the public, we all live here, we deserve to know. The larger group says no, for a variety of reasons. They believe these beings are advanced, especially technologically. They're also into ancient alchemy and archaic ritual. They were brought forward or unleashed by two occult figures, whom we will discuss in detail in this book. And it's so interesting, the connections. I suppose the human brain looks for patterns, and let's remember that as we read along. Let's not immediately seek out patterns. Let's try to be open-minded about this, but it is really intriguing. They believe that this ET phenomenon is an army of demons. So, the people that we're speaking of, the people that summoned these demons, the names are going to ring a bell. The first one is Aleister Crowley. He belonged to a thing called the Puritan Brethren, which morphed into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And his ritual magic that he practiced is what these military groups are blaming for local misfortunes that happened to him, and then larger misfortunes happening to the rest of us. He had this ritual called an Amalantra working, that he would receive visions through a scarlet woman. This gets very complicated, but stick with me. So this working, this ritual involved, as do many shamanic and religious and esoteric traditions, it involved the use of inducing an altered state of consciousness through the use of drugs. Now, I'm not advocating that. YouTube doesn't like that. But this is what these people practiced. And he himself, Crowley, claimed he encountered a character, an entity called Lam, L-A-M, who was an interdimensional entity. And he drew this picture of Lam. Let me see if I can find the picture here. He looked uncannily like the later picture Whitley Strieber drew of the gray aliens. Oh, I shouldn't be showing you pictures. Sorry, forget you saw that. Actually, it's all over Google and the internet, so it's okay. Crowley claimed that Lam was this interdimensional entity who was in the past referred to as an Enochian entity from John Dee in the 17th century. John Dee was the occultist for Queen Elizabeth I. Dee claimed that he met little men in a little fiery cloud from the sky. This is sounding familiar. Some say that he tapped into the twilight realm of grays, as in Schreiber, and I'm sorry, I pronounce his name wrong all the time. It's I-E, it's Strieber, Hopkins, John Mack, and I believe David Jacobs. Jacobs is a professor who has written several books, and he is really anti friendly aliens. He's got a whole theory. Anyway, they put themselves into these trance-like states, these researchers like Dee and Crowley, other practitioners, and they do it to access these other realms, altered consciousness. And this is the stuff that Crowley was up to. So now we're going to talk about the other person that this little group within the military believes has summoned demons. And this name might ring a bell. This guy, well, in 1952, June 17th of 1952, in Pasadena, there was an explosion in a residential area that blew up a house that was referred to as the Parsonage. It was the home of a guy called Jack Parsons, who was busy in the basement trying to summon entities. He was very much into Crowley. He was very much into contacting other dimensions. He also had some interesting friends, which we'll talk about, and roommates. But Jack Parsons is was a legitimate. I don't know if you'd call him. I don't know what his official title would be. I'm not entirely sure how much education he had, but he was kind of, it's agreed that he was brilliant, and he was instrumental in helping to establish the space program and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He was the man with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So here's the question that these theorists in the military who believe that ETs are not physically from another planet, but are demonic entities. Did Parsons and possibly Crowley open a portal, or was he manipulated to do it? Did he do it intentionally, or did it happen as a secondary result of these rituals he was fooling around with? And then the next question that they wonder is, was it intentional? Did he make an exchange for his soul? So he was born, and I gotta tell you, his name is something else. Okay, he called himself Jack, and there's a reason, because his birth name, born in 1914, was Marvel Whitehead Parsons. I bet that was a fun name in grade school. Anyway, he started to help. He started out with beginning the space program. He owned the Aerojet Corporation, which made solid fuel rocket boosters. Apparently, that's an important thing in space flight. In his honor, they had a nativity day after Halloween, when the Jet Propulsion Laboratory opened. They did this open house called Nativity Day in his honor. Isn't that an interesting choice of name for this event? They called it the Jack Parsons Laboratory, JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. They also called it Jack Parsons Lives. He was an occultist. He was a follower of Crowley. He was engaged in all sorts of deviant activities, and I won't go into details. I will just hint that it went beyond. It was far too closely attached to his own family, and far too distantly removed from Homo sapiens. That's all I'll say. Before every rocket test that he ran at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, he performed a ritual to the god Pan. He was chosen personally by Crowley to lead the Agape Lodge of the Thelemic Ordo Templi Orientis, which is the order of the Eastern Temple. in California. Parsons did what was called thelemic rituals. This is his belief system to create new humans who would evolve and end Christianity. This was the goal of his group. They had regular parties, all of them, at Jack Parsons' house, the parsonage, that included, remember I said he had some interesting friends? Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, and I'll wait to tell you the next one. He ran rocket research at a place called Devil's Gate Dam in Los Angeles, where the Jet Propulsion Laboratory was established in 1930. That seems early. I don't think he can't have started. Well, maybe he did because he was born in 1914. I should clarify that. I'll have to look that up. Perhaps the laboratory existed before Parsons got involved. I don't want to misspeak, but he became instrumental in running the whole, well, they called it the Jack Parsons Lab, so that gives you an idea. He worked with a guy on rockets called Robert Godding. He was really into H.G. Wells and rocketry. Things he wrote were published by the Smithsonian. He was a legitimate rocket scientist. They launched the first liquid fuel rocket in Massachusetts in 1926. Now, this would be the Goddard rocket launching site. This is not Parsons. This is right before he showed up. And this guy who did the rocket launching with the first liquid fuel rocket, big lover of H.G. Wells, moved his whole production, experimental lab and everything, to Roswell, New Mexico in 1930. It's kind of incredible. I told you there's this web of connections. We're so tempted to spin a narrative from this, but let's try to remain calm. This was he put it in Roswell to have isolation and secrecy. A guy called Frank Molina was actually the first JPL director, but he was a colleague of Parsons, and he went off to Roswell to meet this Goddard guy who was doing secret experiments in New Mexico, very secretive about his work. But he died of throat cancer in 1945. And when that happened, Molina, who was in charge of this is the early iteration, I guess, of what would later become the JPL, he moved the whole rocket tests to White Sands in New Mexico. So now we get to hear about probably Parsons' BFF, it feels like, because they actually were roomies in the parsonage. He was very good friends with L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology. Both big fans of Crowley. Hubbard lived with Parsons, and while they were living together, he went after Parsons' 19-year-old girlfriend, Sarah Northrup. And the name Northrup kind of rang a bell. I wonder if they're related to Northrop Grumman. I think that's the name of it. It's like Lockheed. It's one of those aerospace places. Anyway, they tried what was called a ritual called the Babylon working, and it intended seriously to manifest an elemental entity. 2 weeks later, this young woman, Marjorie Elizabeth Cameron, showed up. This is 1946 we're talking about. And Parsons' comment when he met her was that the ritual worked. I have my elemental. So the three of them, Hubbard, Parsons, and Marjorie, pooled their resources and did rituals to conjure up a moon child. I kind of suspect I know what kind of ritual that was. Anyway, Northrop was jealous of Cameron. Remember, Sarah Northrop is Parsons' girlfriend that Hubbard had an affair with. Complicated. So Northrop was jealous of Cameron. She left Parsons for Hubbard. They stole $10,000 from, I don't know if it was directly from Parsons or it was from their business, but they stole $10,000 and they left and went to sea. Parsons finally found them at sea. He found the boat and figured out where they were, put a spell on them, and they both almost drowned. The rumor was that Hubbard was working secretly for officials to end Parsons' work. Like, I don't know what officials. I don't know yet. Crowley did not have a high opinion of Hubbard, because now remember, this is just not theoretical interest. They physically knew Crowley as a person. He was at their house. They did rituals together. He knew Parsons well, and he knew L. Ron Hubbard, and his opinion of Hubbard was, and I quote, he's a lout. Many believe that in 1918, when Crowley did that ritual and claimed he met Lamb, the prototype of the gray, right, that he actually opened some kind of portal. Now, this is what some people say. I don't know. I haven't finished the book, so I'll be finished it by next week, and I'll let you know. So this portal that Crowley actually unlocked and opened was enlarged by Parsons and Hubbard. This is what's believed. Soon after they had the ritual, something interesting happened. This may ring a bell. Does the name Kenneth Arnold sound familiar? If you're a huge UFO fanatic, it will sound familiar. Kenneth Arnold was a private pilot of a small plane who was involved in a mass search effort for a crashed plane in the mountains of, I think, eastern Washington state. And while he was up there in the sky over Mount Rainier, he saw UFOs. He was the first person to coin the term flying saucer. He saw glints in the sky. He saw all these saucers. I think there were a dozen. My numbers might be a little off, but it was a mass, and could not figure out what it was he was looking at. Anyway, he coined the term saucer, flying saucer. Days after he reported this, he was told by a preacher contacted him and told him that the UFOs were harbingers of doomsday. Now, there's a claim that has not been proven. So this is, I guess, speculation or rumor, but I think it's interesting that enough people have said this that it got put in the book, that Arnold and Parsons were often together. They spent time together. They knew each other. Let's talk a little bit about what was happening with the government at the time. In 1947, the government had Project Sign, and this was all about checking out these rumors of weird things in the sky. It got renamed basically Project Grudge in 1948, and it eventually became Project Blue Book, which should sound familiar. Now, theoretically, allegedly, according to the government, Project Blue Book was ended in 1969. The Air Force, hang on. The Air Force admitted, this is mind-blowing. I thought I had to check the number. I wasn't sure I was reading it right. They had taken reports of cases through Project Blue Book, and they were able to eliminate some cases because there were explanations, but they had 701 completely inexplicable cases of sightings. And the whole situation with Roswell is still unexplained. And important to remember that it involved the Army Air Force PR guy who dealt with the media came out and announced, that they'd crashed a UFO in the desert. He did that on his own because he thought that was his job. And he got in huge trouble and people freaked out. And there was an air base close to Roswell. And eventually the materials, whatever it was they found out there in the desert, including rumor of beings, were all sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. At the time it was, I don't think it was called that. I think it was just Wright Airfield. But nevertheless, they all ended up being schlepped across to that place in great secrecy. Something happened. So Roswell, as yet, has never been officially explained. Jesse Martell was the Army intelligence officer who wrote about it later, and he saw the wreckage. He said it was made out of unknown material. It was not a metal or, any kind of material known to Earth. Some say that the Babylon working, the ritual that they did, caused a huge increase in UFO sightings. They call it the Devil's Floodgate. Okay, now I started to get more serious about taking notes, and it'll be a little bit more clear of a narrative. We're on chapter 4, the Parsons files. From an Air Force base in Nebraska, those who believe in the demonic theory of UFOs are located there. The author, Redfern, he tried to interview them, and they said, no, thank you. But 3 days later, he got a call out of the blue, an anonymous call, and the person on the other end offered to him to talk with him about what was called the Collins Elite. We'll explain that, but what he offered to talk with Redfern about was what the caller referred to as the devil UFO story. So they made an appointment to talk, and this man introduced himself as Mr. Duke. Redfern went to Albuquerque, New Mexico to meet with him, and he got to meet senior members. This Duke guy introduced himself as a senior member of the Collins Elite. He explained it was a very covert group within U.S. intelligence that dealt with demonology. He was 86 at the time, and he was the last of the original Collins Elite, which was associated with U.S. intelligence, namely the CIA. So this is getting interesting. He told Redfern of a secret intelligence investigation that went on of Parsons, his questionable loyalty to the United States, his links to Israel and Israeli intelligence, and to Crowley in the 40s and the 50s. Now, we have to put ourselves back in the past and remember the history of what was going on. The Israeli state was being founded, and still, the Zionist movement, maybe not so much, but there still was a contingent of people who were very much tied to biblical prophecy. It's important to remember that. So, because of the investigation of Parsons that went on, the CIA created this group called the Elite. The name started out kind of as a joke, really. The CIA even looked into the possibility that Parsons and Crowley and Hubbard caused the huge increase in flying saucers that that really ramped up in the 1940s. Duke had a ton of documents about Parsons from the Air Force, the FBI, the Army, and other agencies and departments. And Redfern saw them and he said they looked original. They looked, aged around the edges and typed and that kind of thing. So this is the story told by this accumulation of papers. In 1950 in California, the FBI said that Parsons took sensitive documents from Hughes Airport where he worked, and he took the documents without permission. Now here's a little interesting synchronicity. Hughes Airport, which was more than just an airport, it was stuff going on down there, and it wasn't that huge. It was right below the cliff where my university was. I have many times sat on a bench at night and looked down at Hughes Airport. So I just think that's funny synchronicity. Parsons, according to the FBI investigation, stole these documents. What were they? Well, we don't know. Parsons told the FBI agent that he extracted information from the documents to use in his job application in Israel. He claimed to be applying for a job with a company in Israel. Now, this is the 1950s. Within 24 hours, the document itself that the FBI found that he had got sent to Wright Field. It wasn't Wright-Patterson yet, Wright Field, to be determined whether it was really, truly top secret classified or not. And Parsons got fired from Hughes. He was forced to write out an admission of guilt for the FBI, and the military freaked out when they saw this document. We still don't know what it said. They freaked out and they marked it seriously confidential. And Parsons was like, oh, it's not a big deal. He downplayed the whole thing. He told the FBI, don't worry about it. I'm done with the dark world. So it came out later that he had worked before this incident for the government in research and development into whatever, and for Northrop. Remember Sarah Northrop, his girlfriend? So the question that Redfern was putting to Duke, Mr. Duke, the last living member of the Collins elite, was Parsons stupid? Was he careless? Was he a spy? What was going on? Well, the Air Force had files on Jack Parsons and on Aleister Crowley. The Air Force claimed they were a religious cult, that they were advocates of sex perversion, strange goings-on at their Thelema church, that it was, as described by the Air Force and the FBI, a gathering of perverts. And keep in mind that Marjorie and Jack and Hubbard were doing some kind of moonchild ritual, trying to conceive a moonchild. So you know what they're talking about. In 1943, Parsons had told the FBI, oh, we're not a religion, we're a philosophy. So the FBI called Crowley, made a reference to Crowley as an international poet. So Parsons, Hubbard, and Crowley were involved with women, according to the FBI, who had loose morals. And Parsons' activities were familiar to the scientists in Pasadena. So what we're talking about here is it's in previously confidential FBI documents that an investigation was done into this house full of philosophers in Pasadena. And Parsons, Hubbard, Crowley, Sarah Northrop, Marjorie were very suspect in the eyes of the FBI. They weren't sure to whom their loyalty was. Like, did it reside with other countries? Were they working for other foreign intelligence, maybe? And then there were those who were like, are they summoning demons? And that's why everyone's seeing UFOs. But they said, well, wait a minute. This is really serious because these guys are all connected with rocket scientists in Pasadena. This has potential to be a real problem. So on the same day that all of this was finally figured out by the FBI, the day that the document was classified by the military, Parsons was given access to top secret military information. That's known to be a fact in relationship to military rocketry. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of this. 2 days later, the review board that allowed clearance said, oh, no. And they revoked it. They rescinded his clearance. They said he was a danger to national security. So if you feel like this is confusing, it's because it is. And I think it's because it was confusing to the people at the time. They were trying to figure out what was going on with these odd people in Pasadena. Very odd people who had odd extracurricular activities and yet were very important in the beginnings of the American space program and rocketry. So military and aeronautics and space and demonology. And this was freaking out these buttoned up guys in the FBI and in the military. And remember what Lou Elizondo said, there's a sizable chunk of people in the American military, all the branches, who are very conservative, very conventional, and fundamentalist Christian. So they're all into biblical prophecy. And they look at all of this through that lens. So now we're on chapter 5, the coming of the Collins elite. We're going to explain the name. So Mr. Duke told Redfern, the author, that these investigators exposed people that were in the military and in the FBI to this whole cabal of Parsons and Hubbard and everybody. And they referred to them as these guys in the house, the parsonage. They referred, the military and intelligence referred to them as the people on the project. What project? Freedom of Information Act documents show that a lot of important names in aerospace and in the military and in the government were involved in one way or another with Parsons. For example, Parsons had been included by the military into investigations of Kenneth Arnold's sightings of UFOs. So why? Parsons and Arnold had known each other through mutual friends, it is once again said. Parsons was friends with Hubbard. Hubbard wrote science fiction. And a lot of his work, and then he started Scientology, which I won't even go there. A lot of Hubbard's work later became movies like Battlestar Galactica with John Travolta, well-known Scientologists. Hubbard was well known to publish, he published the magazine called Amazing Stories with Palmer, Raymond Palmer, and Palmer was friends with Arnold, Kenneth Arnold, and helped him by publishing his book, The Coming of the Saucers. It's very incestuous that all these people knew each other. The publisher of Amazing Stories published and was good friends with Kenneth Arnold, who saw the saucers, who was friends with Parsons, who was involved with Crowley and Hubbard, who was friends with the publisher. It's this closed circle. So the assumption is that Parsons was a sorcerer that he knew Arnold, who saw the discs in 1947, which began the flying saucer phenomenon. The Air Force reports that they have say that Parsons knew Robert Goddard, the guy who moved his laboratory that was the early iteration of the work that was later done at the JPL. He moved that to Roswell. If you remember, we talked about that. So Parsons is linked to the first modern flying saucer sightings and to the big to-do, the flying saucer crash in New Mexico. Parsons was vocal that UFOs would convert the world to Aleister Crowley. He said that all the time. And the Air Force met with Parsons in 1948 to ask, given his activities with Crowley and Hubbard, the land situation, you know, that Crowley manifested, did Parsons have something to tell the Air Force? The Air Force politely asked him. So he got a security clearance, Parsons did, and he then conceded to the Air Force that there was a connection between the 1947 UFO sightings. And he said, yeah, you know, they probably were connected to me opening a portal, opening a door through my rituals. It's not a coincidence that he knew Arnold and was linked to Roswell. Just a few too many coincidences in this. So the question is, okay, all right, everybody calm down. Was this Parsons' ego because he wasn't the most average of people? Was this his ego, or was this actually the truth? The officials who investigated him from the FBI and the military, they could not decide. The Air Force saw the threads, the same threads that we're talking about, but they just couldn't decide. Therefore, they had a small project at Wright-Patterson and reached out to experts in, and they're forming this group, experts in, wait for it, demonology, religion, ancient religion, and occult practices. Put together this group to find out what, if anything, Parsons might have set in motion, and that the military was trying to understand. The Air Force collected copious amounts of data on Parsons and Crowley and discovered that Crowley was directly linked to British intelligence, which was a disturbing realization. So now we're going to just take a little aside story here. Parsons, who was born October 2nd in 1914, remember that date, October 2nd, 1914. There had been a prediction by a guy called Charles Russell, who was a minister from Pittsburgh. He was the founder of a group called the Bible Studies Movement that later morphed into the Jehovah's Witnesses. They were keeping a countdown to the end of the world. And they said that countdown began on October 2nd, 1914, Parsons' birth date. His birth was a harbinger of the countdown to the end of the world. Because on that date, according to Russell, the Antichrist would surface, and the harlot of Babylon the Great. Parsons was born that day. He tried to incarnate Babylon in one of his rituals, and he actually signed an oath. I don't know, one day they had a dinner party, and L. Ron Hubbard and Aleister Crowley came over, and Parsons signed an oath that he was the Antichrist. So the military has all this information on Parsons, and it raises the question, was he an Israeli spy? They have information on Crowley, on the occult, on the end of world predictions. And then Parsons blew himself up accidentally, and there was also another person killed, I guess, who may have invited the saucers and opened a portal and kicked off the advent of the Antichrist. So now dead, these guys were not around to shut the portal door. So what was going to happen? And the military was completely freaked out by this. So then this little group of demonologists and ancient religionists and occultists was formed, called the Collins Elite. About a week after Parsons died, the military formed this group. And it was made up of people in military intelligence with connections to all these areas of study to continue what Parsons had been studying. Did UFOs come from the devil? That was the working theory. The Pentagon was very secret about it because they feared Congress's reaction. Oh, I imagine they did. Especially to the fact that the military was spending tax money on this stuff, demonology and flying saucers, and were they aggressors? But this was not allocated for that purpose by Congress. So Congress has the power of the purse. When the budget is created, they say what goes, how much money goes to each thing, and it's line item. It's all very specific. And the Pentagon gets this budget. They're not allowed to play fast and loose with it. So from day one, interest in demonology and UFOs was breaking the law as far as money from Congress came. Not allowed to do that. So they were very secretive about it. And the secrecy was it was around using the tax money without congressional oversight. They were afraid to bring it to Congress because they were afraid Congress would tell them, okay, this is crazy. And then what if it's real and we're not on top of it? That was their whole thing. So it was not just because of the topic, but the money that the elite members were offered. For example, they and their families were given money from the Pentagon to relocate their families to Washington, D.C. so they could all get together to study. So this, this presented some serious fiduciary issues. Their pay was filtered to them through the CIA's Directorate of Plans, and that was to bury it. So we're talking dark money. To bury the funding and to keep the group unknown and out of sight. They weren't known publicly the way that Project Blue Book was known publicly. So the name, we were going to talk about where did they get this name. So the name was chosen by one member of the elite, some kind of an expert. Oh, I know what I have it written down. He was from a place called Collins, New York, and he was a Quaker, and he was an expert on devil worship. And he had a relative in the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA. And this relative recommended him to the military. Hey, my relative, the Quaker, is an expert on the devil. You guys in the CIA should hire him. And so they did. And they teased this guy, the Quaker. They teased him about being the elite from Collins, or the Collins Elite, and it stuck and it became the name for the whole group. So all of this information thus far comes to Redfern from a guy called Richard Duke. In his 80s, claims to be the last living member of the Collins Elite. So I'm going to end this here. It's a little tiny short, but not that short, because it's a good break in the topic. So this is the end of video 1. And I'll be back. And I'm hoping that you're finding this as riveting as I found it. When I started to read the book, I thought, oh, come on, you guys. It's not like I don't have enough to do. The week they asked me to read this book, I was already taking notes on 2 other books. It's hard to tear myself away from this book. It's very, very interesting. And if this topic appeals to you, and you know of some good books about it, and I've read a few, but I just don't remember, I'm open to comments. I'm open to suggestions, and we can pursue this a little more if you're interested. It's kind of a nice departure from, I was going to say from reality, but let's not jump to conclusions either. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you're enjoying this. Let me know in the comments, and I'll be back with video number 2. And until then, slán go fóill, slán.